Here are three quarterbacks that you have to keep an eye on during the preseason. All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting the way we'd like them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Magdziuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. You can also read her at Yahoo Fantasy. On today's show, we're going to be taking a look at three quarterbacks that you need to keep an eye on in the preseason for your dynasty teams. Now, a lot of these quarterbacks that we're going to mention don't have immediate fantasy value, but potentially could down the road. So, Kate, let's start with probably the biggest name, not probably, definitely the biggest name on this list. It's Michael Penix, who was a surprise top 10 pick by the Atlanta Falcons. Why are you so intrigued to see Penix in the preseason?
I think I'm most intrigued because it actually is probably one of the best successor fits when you look at what Kirk Cousins does really well and pair that with what Michael Penix does really well. It matches perfectly. So if we're saying theoretically that Kirk Cousins is a great fit for this Atlanta Falcons offense, I think that largely applies to Michael Penix too. You look back and there were plenty of reasons why maybe he could have been a higher draft pick, but fell, right? He had 4 seasons at Indiana before eventually transferring to Washington, had a season-ending injury in every single one of them, 2 ACL tears and an AC joint issue in each shoulder that ended his seasons prematurely. Goes to Washington, gets an opportunity to hit the reset button, almost wins them a national championship. But looking at what he is a pure pocket passer. He's 6'2", 214 pounds, and he absolutely lives in the pocket. He can make dime throws down the field. Sometimes I think has some accuracy or touch issues, I would say, like on these short range throws, because he does have a rocket of an arm, and I don't know that he's totally figured out how to wrangle it in. But if you're watching along with us on YouTube, 2023 grade percentiles per PFF, 75 percentile clean pocket grade. That translates very well to what is a quarterback doing when he's not pressured, right? Like that's the kind of evaluation here. Pressure isn't necessarily a constant thing. You have injuries on the offensive line, but like what they do when they have a clean pocket is kind of indicative of who they are as a player. 54th percentile no play action grade. Kind of surprised that it's as low because he's not exactly a mobile threat here. I wouldn't think the difference between that would be all that much, but 97th or 97th percentile sack rate. He came out, and this was a class full of players that took a lot of unnecessary sacks. Caleb Williams, high sack rate. Drake May, high sack rate. These were all red flags for this class. And he was one of the guys that, again, this is kind of a predictive stat. If you're good at avoiding sacks in college, that'll translate fairly well. Like that was good. I keep going back to the situation that he was a productive passer in college. He's backed up to a quarterback who I think is a pretty good scheme fit for like what he does. It's intriguing.
There's a lot of reasons to be intrigued by Michael Penix. And one of the reasons why I'm interested to see him in the preseason, Kate, is number one, I would be shocked if Kirk Cousins takes a single preseason snap coming off the torn Achilles. Like they're just not
why
going.
Would you?
Why would you? He is a vet at this. I mean, he's been around the league for over a decade now. No reason to have him play in the preseason. But Penix will give us our first look at what Zach Robinson's offense is going to look like. And I've got to imagine Penix is going to be running with the first team. I've got to imagine that the Falcons are just going to give Penix a ton of snaps in the preseason because they're going to want him to develop with Cousins being the starter, the clear-cut starter. So we're going to see Penix probably throw 75 passes, maybe 100 passes in the preseason. It's going to give us an idea of what this offense could potentially look like and what Penix could look like in this offense. Is it a lot of shots down the field? Is he throwing in the middle of the field, throwing some seam routes? Are they trying to get him on the move a little bit? Even though he's not a mobile quarterback, he is a great athlete. So are they trying to get him more out on bootlegs and, stretch play action and all that kind of stuff? I'm just really curious to see what it looks like in Atlanta, because I do think if and when he gets this starting job, I do think he could have a lot of fantasy value. Okay, we're looking at somebody like CJ Stroud, who basically had nearly zero rushing production last year through 20 passing touchdowns, right? And all of a sudden, that's a top 5 dynasty quarterback. I'm not saying Michael Penix is going to be CJ Stroud, but it wouldn't be hard for him to have a successful rookie season, sophomore season, and then have his value go all the way up inside the top 10 because of the hype. I just think there's a lot of wiggle room here for Michael Penix, and it's why I'm so excited to see him.
I mean, and you look at where Penix is ranked right now. He's QB 29 in dynasty leagues. He doesn't have to do much, honestly. I think he looks fairly competent. He might see his ranks rise. You mentioned the fit with Zach Robinson, which I think is going to be a tremendous fit in this offense, considering the quarterbacks in play, right? You had kind of a questionable, in the same building. You had this, or, not the same building, formerly the same building. I'm a mess. Matthew Stafford with Zach Robinson, this guy that, he is fairly athletic when you need him to be. He can move, but that's not the crux of his game whatsoever. Yep. Like, the archetype of quarterback, I think, is fairly similar, and that could translate really well. And we saw it translate really well with this Rams offense. I just think the room for growth is kind of tremendous at that value of QB 29. Now, let's just talk about the pathway to any sort of fantasy relevance, because if you are going to, maybe grab Michael Penix, maybe he's on your waiver wire. If you're in a single quarterback league, if you're in a super flex, you might need to send some late round draft capital. What does the pathway look like? Like, what would actually need to happen? Because obviously the Falcons made a pretty sizable financial investment in Kirk Cousins this year.
I mean, number one, it would be injuries, right? If Kirk Cousins just can't stay healthy, that's the quickest way for him to get on the field. But I think it's also if Penix just looks absolutely amazing in the preseason, and it's just clear that there's not a big gap between the two, I could see the Falcons moving on from Kirk Cousins after 1 year, taking the dead cap hit in 2025 and just giving this team over to Penix, because you would have 3 more years on his rookie contract plus the 5th-year option. They're going to want to see him play. And I think the way this usually works out, whenever you draft a quarterback inside the top 10, they end up playing a lot sooner than anybody expects, even when there's an entrenched starter like Kirk Cousins. So how quickly could he become a fantasy asset? I think quicker than anybody anticipates.
I think that's fair. My last point that I want to make with Michael Penix is that, though I'm intrigued, I want to warn our listeners that I do think, because of the lack of rushing upside, Marcus, this is the guy that had 8 total rushing yards in the 2023 season. 8 total rushing yards. And he played all the way on through the national championship. So, it was no shortage of games played here for Michael Penix. The rushing upside, I do think, despite the fact that, physically he is built as a good athlete, that's just not the way that he plays the quarterback position. No. I think for that reason, you are going to need to be an uber efficient passer. And, luckily in that Falcons offense, you've got Drake London, you've got Kyle Pitts, you've got
Darnell Mooney, Bijan Robinson, Rondale Moore. Yep.
James you've got Washington some weapons. And I'm not going to say they have the best receiving core in the league, but you've got some things to work with there that I think are intriguing, but I do want to just preface that with like, I do think the ceiling is pretty capped, but like, would I be surprised if Penix eventually becomes like a perennial low end QB1 that you could probably snag for cheaper in a super flex league?
Let
Yeah.
me give you could he be Tua in the NFL?
Marcus, I think that's a great comparison, but I hate it because I do think Tua's upside is rather capped. I think Tua's probably going to be a perennial QB 15. But then
Which is
again,
fine. Yeah.
if that's what you're getting and that's what you know you're getting and you're paying QB 29 prices, suddenly that's a lot more palatable than paying, market cost or higher for a guy like
100%.
Tua who just has more name value.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about another quarterback in a very interesting situation, and that's Kate's guy, Sam Howell. We will talk about
Don't you
his
dare.
preseason prospects next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But with the playoffs winding down, we just have fewer and fewer games to watch. And the sports aren't sporting the way we'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I'm in the mood. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets any time that I want. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to fanduel.com and start making the most out of your summer. Go check out all the lines in the Olympics. Go check out the NFL futures. We've got preseason games that you can wager on coming up. It's going to be absolutely crazy. Cannot wait. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Make sure you go to FanDuel and start making the most out of your summer. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Kate, let's talk about Sam Howell, who was traded for a late round pick from the Commanders over to the Seahawks. The Seahawks lost Drew Lock as their backup, who went to the Giants. Just this big quarterback carousel that happens every year. Sam Howell now as the number 2 quarterback in Seattle. Why are you excited to watch him in the preseason?
I'm mainly excited because I think there's, some good personnel here in Seattle. You've got DK Metcalf, you've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, who I'm a big believer in. And let's be honest, like this 2023 season for Sam Howell was nothing short of a disaster. If you're watching along with us on YouTube, 10th percentile clean pocket grade. Again, just when we were talking about Michael Penix Jr. in the last segment, I said the clean pocket grade tells you a lot about what a quarterback does in isolation of all these elements around him. Sam Howell didn't perform very well. 10th percentile clean pocket grade, 13th percentile grade on throws at or beyond the sticks, 38th percentile no play action grade. What's really shocking, Marcus ranked dead last among all qualifying quarterbacks in terms of grade on play action throws, which I found even more surprising because play action usually like we can get duped a little bit. If you're using a lot of play action, sometimes that can mask some of the inadequacies of a quarterback's play. Sam Howell couldn't even use play action to mask those bad qualities. Led the league in sacks taken, 30th percentile in terms of sack rate, pressure to throw, or pressure to sack rate. Like there was not a lot to walk away from in 2023 positively with Sam Howell. But I will say he was a fantasy relevant quarterback, despite the fact, and that was largely based on volume. But, again, he was throwing to Terry McLaurin, who is a very good wide receiver. He's not a top 5 wide receiver, thrown to Jahan Dotson. Didn't really have any true threat in terms of a receiving tight end. Like, he's getting a huge upgrade in terms of personnel. And I do think that of all the quarterbacks we're talking about today, he probably has the easiest path to starting in 2024 if things don't seem to bounce back in terms of Geno Smith's overall efficiency and production.
And we should mention this is a new coaching staff at the Seahawks with Mike McDonald running it there. I still believe in Geno. I think Geno's a very, very good quarterback.
I think
but
he
you're
was
probably
better than his 2023 season stats would indicate.
yes. But Geno has not been the most durable quarterback either. He's missed some games. Last year, he missed some games because of a groin injury. My issue with Sam Howell is, and you mentioned it, a lot of his fantasy production was based on volume last year. And if you believe that the weapons around him are going to make him better and more efficient, I buy that. I just don't know if it's going to be worth the trade-off of not basically leading the NFL in passing attempts, right? I think Mike McDonald is going to want to be, he's a defensive-minded head coach. I think he's going to want to have a more balanced offensive attack, run the ball with their two really good running backs, and be efficient when it comes to passing. Even if Sam Howell gets out of the field, I'm curious to see what it would look like. But again, this is somebody who has thrown the ball a lot in the NFL in his first two seasons. So you look at the quote unquote high upside backups across the NFL. There's not many that have more upside than Sam Howell, just because he is somebody that's willing to throw the ball down the field, and not many backups will do that.
Yeah, and I do think just looking at, again, kind of the new coaching staff, I think the Seattle Seahawks, just generally a better franchise in a better position overall than we saw Sam Howell with the Washington Commanders, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Washington Commanders still have a bunch of reset buttons. They still need to push in order to get themselves in a place where I think they're going to be setting Jaden Daniels up for long-term success. But like, Sam Howell, I do think was thrown a little bit to the wolves, and I just want to see him get a clean reset with a coaching staff that I think, I'm going to be honest, like I trust a little bit more there in Seattle than I do what we saw with like Eric Bieniemy, who I just kind of think seemed lost in 2023.
Let me ask you this, Kate. Like, in an ideal world, what do you want to see from Sam Howell in preseason that would get you excited about the potential of him starting again and potentially becoming a fantasy asset? Like, what would you need to see?
I would like to see him make sharp decisions, and I would like to see him make decisions more quickly. Not holding on to the ball, learning how to not take a sack. Like, I think that's a big part. Like, you lead the league in sacks. Think of how many yards that is lost on offense instead of learning to throw the ball away and learning when the play is kind of a lost cause, right? Like, sometimes you need to throw the ball away, and sometimes you need to take the check down. Sometimes, like, he almost has this kind of Josh Allen hero ball mentality. He's willing to push the ball down the field, but that's almost all he wants to do sometimes. So, like,
he's Josh Allen without Josh Allen's body or arm.
He's Josh Allen without Josh Allen's talent. And that's a kind of a wild west approach. But again, he was fantasy relevant in his lone season as a starter, despite all of those really negative things we mentioned. He gets a huge upgrade, I think, both in terms of personnel and coaching staff. This might be a good thing for Sam Howell, because I liked him as a prospect. He's got, that prototypical quarterback build. He's sneaky athletic. Like, there's a lot of things to like about Sam Howell, the player, if you can coach him and refine him, because he was a guy that needed, I think, coaching that he did not get with the Washington Commanders.
I agree. All right, let's talk about Spencer Rattler, who we both liked pre-draft. I know a lot of people liked him coming out of high school. I know people liked him at Oklahoma and South Carolina. Could he potentially get on the field sooner than anybody thinks? We will debate that next. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier than ever before. prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer that it gets to first pitch. And with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater events near you. And save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. And get this, you can save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose your exact seats. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, on our next 3 shows, we're going to be looking at players you need to watch in the preseason at the running back position, wide receiver position, and of course the tight end position. On Wednesday's show, Matt Williamson will be back to chat with us about some running backs. So make sure you tune in for that. But Kate, let's finish up here with Spencer Rattler, who fell way down in the 2024 NFL draft. I think a lot of people were expecting maybe he could slide into like the back end of the second round, top of the third round, goes all the way to the 5th round to the Saints. Are you excited to see him in the preseason?
I am excited to see him in the preseason. And a big part of that comes back to the fact that he probably does have an easier pathway than most of these rookie quarterbacks that like aren't automatically slated to start. Some of these backups, right? Like he has an easier pathway because I don't necessarily think that the Saints have seen what they want to see out of Derek Carr to this point. Now, let's talk about Spencer Rattler, like the player, why he fell in the draft. Now, like he coming out was a guy with a lot of arm talent, I think a lot of upside, but you know, on the smaller side for an NFL quarterback, just over 6 foot, 211 pounds, tested well below a below average athlete, but I do think has more mobility on tape than you would probably guess based on the athletic testing. And again, I go back to the arm talent. Like that's why I think Spencer Rattler was something that was thought at as such a high upside player because he can make a bunch of different throws. Like who would you compare Spencer Rattler's arm talent to a player, please, Marcus?
Oh, I mean, you're talking about top 7, top 8 arm already in the NFL. I mean, he's got a awesome release. He can throw from multiple different angles. He's got the velocity. I mean, it's a very, very good NFL arm. I think for most divisions, he would have the strongest arm inside that division.
But also, like, I think he has, you know,
I got a comp. I got one.
Okay.
I think his arm is as good or better than Derek Carr, who a lot of people in the league believe has one of the top 5 or 6 arms in the league.
There you go. And I do think that Spencer Rattler can be a little bit more creative and can do a little bit more in terms of like maneuverability and making some of the more awkward throws. Like I think Spencer Rattler could succeed in that regard. Now, looking at the opportunity, right? Like I said, I just don't think that this Saints offense has seen enough from Derek Carr to just take his contract for granted at this point.
I agree. It was rough last year for Derek Carr. Like there were some really tough games down the stretch. And I think the fact that the Saints felt like they needed to spend another draft pick on a quarterback after spending a 4th round pick on Jake Haener just a year ago tells you where we're at with Derek Carr. And Spencer Rattler is intriguing. This is a former 5-star recruit, the number 1 quarterback recruit in his class that had a little bit of a rough time in Oklahoma, went to South Carolina and was absolutely fantastic. I thought he was pretty good at the Senior Bowl as well. I would expect, Kate, that he is going to play a majority of the snaps in the preseason. And I'm telling you right now, there are going to be 2 or 3 throws or 2 or 3 plays that he makes in the preseason where everybody just gets so excited about on Twitter. And sometimes that's all it takes for his value to rise in Dynasty League. If you're in like a super flex league, like a deep super flex league, he's probably already rostered. Of these three players, kind of think he has the best chance to get on the field the quickest between Michael Penix and Sam Howell, just because the quarterback situation at the top is. Would you say Derek Carr is the worst quarterback between Kirk Cousins, Geno Smith, and Carr?
Oh, without a question here. My biggest question, in terms of how quickly he can get on the field is Derek Carr's contract. And again, I said I don't think he did enough to make a huge difference, but there's a lot of dead money associated with Derek Carr's contract. He's got 3 void years tacked onto the. Is there any team worse at managing their cap space than the New Orleans Saints in the entire
I think
world?
some people would say they're great because they just managed to figure it out every year. But at the same time, like it's very hard for them to make moves because they're so tight up against the cap every year.
You're so tight up against the cap, and like they're still trying to work out another agreement with Alvin Kamara, who like is another big part of the okay, that's like besides the point. But you look at Derek Carr's contract, and like this season, I mean, a lot of dead money attached. Next season, $50 million in dead cap with a cap savings of just 1.3 million. You don't really see sort of that potential out until the final year of his deal, 2026. And even then, they still have a pretty sizable chunk in dead money. $28.6 million, at least $32.7 million saved. But that's the first year it kind of becomes a more manageable and a more palatable change. So like the only question is how steadfast do you think they are going to be in regards to standing by Derek Carr because they made that significant and detrimental financial investment in a quarterback that doesn't pan out?
I think they're going to, I don't anticipate the Saints being all that competitive in the NFC South. And if it gets to a point where they are 4-6 after 10 games, I think that's when we'll see Spencer Rattler or maybe Jake Haener on the field to just give this team a spark. Because if you were to list all 32 teams, Kate, like their excitement level going into the 2024 season, I'm not saying the Saints are the worst team because it's not the case, right? There's teams that are way worse than the Saints. But it just feels like, what's the point of this current Saints team? It feels like they are destined to be like an 8-win team and not finish at the top of the conference or top of the division. I think Rattler or Jake Haener can provide a little bit of excitement onto a team that doesn't have a lot of it right now.
Yeah, I just think right now you're looking at the New Orleans Saints, and generally speaking, they're capped, which is unfortunate because they've got Chris Olave on a rookie contract. They've got Rashid Shaheed on one of the best deals among any wide receiver in the NFL. Like this dynamic, deep threat weapon who, electric in the return game. Like Rashid Shaheed, a very exciting prospect. I'm excited to see heading into the season. But with the quarterback play, I do just feel like, generally speaking, this is a team that's kind of met their ceiling. And I do think Spencer Rattler is a guy that could raise that ceiling. Maybe you lower the floor a little bit, but maybe that's what the Saints need to do to get back in a position where they can be at the top of the draft order and truly find a difference maker at the top of the draft, maybe find their franchise quarterback of the future, or look to Sam Howell Spencer Rattler.
Yeah. See, you get Sam Howell on your mind all the time. It's fine.
I know. He's all I think about. Maybe Spencer Rattler's the guy. I don't know.
The Saints desperately need somebody to give them some juice on offense, right? Some excitement. I think there's a potential that Spencer Rattler could do that for them. So I'm curious to see how he performs in the preseason, how he looks in that offense. It should be a lot of fun. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Again, on tomorrow's show, we will talk about 3 running backs that we are excited to watch in the preseason. So make sure you tune in for that. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. You can also read her at Yahoo Fantasy. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.